Hello everyone. Welcome to my YNR 24 spoilers. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Claire makes her decision, and Kyle goes back to Audra. Claire Newman is unhappy, according to spoilers for the young and the restless. The message wasn't reinforced by her attempt to avoid Kyle Abbott. Rather, he took a plane to Los Angeles, California, to keep an eye on her. Kyle is accustomed to what Holden Novak is delivering. He stands for the admirable qualities Claire noticed in Kyle when they first met and how their friendship blossomed into a romantic one. Kyle worries that Holden is just a few steps away from taking his place in Claire's heart. Without a definitive reconciliation, her decision to end their relationship leaves Kyle with an unimaginable choice, yet it could come. Novak, Holden took a necessary risk. Holden must have known it was dangerous to take Claire to the bar where he and Audra Charles used to go. As expected, Sienna Bacall approached the table at which they were seated and brought up awkward subjects. Even the remarks Sienna made about Audra, whom she humorously called Audrey, didn't appear to bother Claire. Holden, however, was not at all pleased with the interaction. He wants to come across as a morally upright substitute for Kyle's shady manipulation. Given that she doesn't yet feel the same intensity of affection for Holden that he does for her, Claire probably wasn't disturbed. Audra Charles properly remains a lone Audra, like Kyle, is unable to regulate her actions. One of the reasons they didn't get along when working for Victor Newman at Glissade was because they both had the trait. Just like Holden fell in love with Claire, Audra fell in love with Kyle. Kyle figured Audra agreed with him that their brief relationship had nothing to do with love. He was mistaken. Audra is in love with a man named Kyle. She might have been falling in love with Nate Hastings, Sean Dominic, whom she liked. However, Kyle was the first man to make an impression on her, and because of his repeated rejections, she has been acting vindicatively. In the absence of his most recent love, Kyle Abbott descends. At first, returning to Audra would be awful. Because they are both temperamental, they are not a good fit. Summer Newman's follow-up, Claire, felt forced and hurried. Both Kyle and Lanier's superb portrayal of that character had plenty of room to develop their storylines. However, it was decided to combine Aaron's portrayal with the characters. But perhaps their hearts will expand and their viewpoints will shift if they are honest with one another. However, there will be strong opposition from related characters in order to travel from here to there. Smooth transactions aren't the foundation of great soap. Hearts and minds are drawn to the screen by intensity, drama, and dramatic changes. Kyle and Audra together may be a sizzling combination. It would be worth watching to see if they will last. Claire Newman is at a crossroads, torn between the strong emotional influences around her and her own sense of self. She didn't make the decision to break up with Kyle Abbott on a whim. Rather, it was the result of self-analysis, tiredness, and the realization that love without trust turns into a burden rather than a gift. Claire spent weeks trying to persuade herself that Kyle's domineering behavior was due to concern rather than insecurity. However, his deeds were more audible than his words. She hoped he would realize that boundaries were stepping stones to clarity rather than barriers when she made the decision to distance herself. Rather, as if distance didn't pertain to him, Kyle followed her to Los Angeles. His entrance was overwhelming and charming to Claire. What should have been her opportunity to become independent instead became another encounter with the past. She was aware of the irony. She had left Genoa City in search of tranquility, yet chaos had swept across the nation to meet her at the airport. Once interpreted as dedication, Kyle's perseverance now felt more like a desperate attempt to exert control over something that was sliding out of his grip. Holden Novak casually and without expectation or demand into her life. Kyle's erratic intensity contrasted sharply with his serene energy. Claire saw in Holden a reflection of the man Kyle used to pretend to be, open, sincere, and patient. He gave her the truth of the here and now, without any assurances of the future, that felt revolutionary to her. It seemed like betrayal to Kyle, the danger of Holden Novak. However, there were several problems with Holden's intentions. He made an emotional mistake, driven more by habit than by malice, when he took Claire to a bar he used to frequent with Audra Charles. He saw the location as a source of nostalgia, a remembrance of evenings spent with ambition and fun. It was neutral territory for Claire, until Sienna Bacall showed up. An otherwise peaceful evening was made tense by Sienna's distinctive combination of charm and poison. Her casual reference to Audra, mockingly referring to her as Audrey, lit a small fire behind Holden's calm veneer. Holden saw it as the reappearance of a ghost, but Claire saw it as simple banter. He detested the ease with which the past could intrude into the present, and even more so the speed at which Claire appeared unconcerned. However, Claire's response, or lack thereof, was not apathy. It was consciousness. She refused to let her story be dictated by Holden's discomfort, seeing in him a man struggling with the remains of his own. She permitted patience since, in contrast to Kyle, Holden did not attempt to define her. However, she could tell he was becoming more and more fond of her by the way his eyes lingered for too long and how his tone softened when he said her name. She was afraid that one day she might have to disappoint him too, since he was sliding more quickly than she could catch him. Audra Charles, unseen but not alone. Audra Charles, meanwhile, stood on the edge of the tumult, unbeaten but alone. Those who looked closely recognized that her armor was made from rejection, while the rest of the world saw her as cold, manipulative, and self-serving. Once, Kyle had given her a sense of being wanted, understood, and seen. Their relationship had swiftly burnt, consuming reason and leaving behind nothing but ashes. She convinced herself at the end that it was all passion and business, but her heart knew otherwise. Audra's affection for Kyle went beyond just want or desire, under the guise of authority and control. It was the desire to be selected for who she was, not for what she could provide. Unspoken and unfulfilled, that desire had become a storm. Her resentment was anguish masquerading as vengeance rather than hatred. She recognized a part of herself in Kyle and Claire, naive, optimistic, and unaware of the impending pain. Audra, however, was not going to let love to rule her life once more, in contrast to Claire. Instead of being owned by her pain, she determined to stand alone and take responsibility for it. Her bond with Kyle was similar to Holden's with Claire, two individuals brought together by passion but torn apart by pride. They both confused heat for harmony and passion for collaboration. They found destruction and seduction in their mutual reluctance to relinquish power. It was clear to Audra in particular that she could only trust herself. She couldn't get rid of the pain of Kyle's absence, though, even as she spoke that out loud. The decline of Kyle Abbott. The loss of Claire was like déjà vu for Kyle. He had previously been here with Summer Newman, the woman he had once believed he would be with forever. Pride, mistrust, and unsaid grudges had caused their marriage to fall apart. He believed he had a chance to rebuild what he had destroyed and start again with Claire. However, when lessons are not learned, patterns have a nasty way of recurring. Kyle was obsessed with control because he was afraid of losing the people he loved and of being seen as unimportant by them. He was unable to comprehend that Claire's quiet was a declaration rather than a challenge when she left. His quest for Los Angeles was motivated by affirmation rather than reconciliation. At least he could claim to have stood up for her if she rejected him outright. But underneath that bluster was a guy in disarray. Kyle's darker instincts started to reappear without Claire's reassuring presence. The desire for familiarity, rather than love, became the driving force behind the inevitable pull toward Audra. They had the same emotional language, one based on rivalry, passion, and suffering, and they understood each other's disarray. Returning to her would be a step backward, but sometimes it's safer to go backward than to remain motionless. The connection cycles, emotional loops, love lost, love found, love betrayed, are the lifeblood of soap operas. The fundamental human yearning for redemption, however, is hidden beneath the theatrics. Holden, Audra, Claire, and Kyle are all searching for different versions of themselves in other people. Holden looks for meaning. Audra looks for approval. Claire looks for autonomy, and Kyle looks for control. The never-ending quest for knowledge is what ties their lives together, not fate. In a world dominated by relationships, Claire's choice to follow her own path is revolutionary. She doesn't allow romance to determine her value. Her experience reflects the challenge faced by contemporary women: to love profoundly without losing oneself in the process. Kyle's reversion to previous behaviors, on the other hand, emphasizes the price of emotional immaturity. His return to Audra is a metaphorical mirror that forces him to face his shortcomings through someone who embodies them rather than a romantic reunion. Holden, on the other hand, stands for possibility, the notion that love can be kind and that a bond can strengthen rather than break. However, his possessiveness and impatience allude to the same risks that beset Kyle. Despite being portrayed as punishment, Audra's seclusion may actually be her salvation. She gets the opportunity to rebuild and rediscover her value away from men's eyes while she is alone. Claire's clarity and Holden's error. Although Holden's decision to go back to a location connected to his past with Audra may have been reckless, it ultimately sparked the discovery of the truth. Claire learned that night that everyone has a past, and occasionally those pasts clash. She learned that even the most compassionate people have flaws when she saw Holden's response to Sienna's scathing comments. Instead of holding it against him, she saw it as a lesson that love can only coexist with the past rather than completely replace it. This was the turning point in Claire's journey. The guys in her life no longer shaped who she was. She had been compromising, forgiving, and adapting for far too long. She now desired to live a genuine life, even if that meant being by herself. Her development was silent, inward, and strong rather than ostentatious or theatrical. The kind of change that demands peace rather than praise. Kyle and Audra, an accident course. Kyle will eventually go back to Audra, but it will be out of emptiness rather than love. Despite being completely aware that they will be burned, these two are drawn to fire. Their history is intoxicating, and their chemistry is indisputable. However, underneath the fervor is a shared toxicity that neither has been able to address. Despite her apparent self-assurance, Audra still bears the wounds of rejection. Even though Kyle acts as though he has moved on, he is still caught in vicious cycles of fear and ego. The boundary between retaliation and reconciliation will be blurred by their emotional collision during their tumultuous reunion. They might even convince themselves that they have discovered something genuine for a while. However, love based on suffering seldom lasts in the world of the young and the restless. Theirs will probably burn quickly and brightly, leaving only lessons behind. The significance of decisions. Claire chooses her path and Kyle turns back to Audra is a story about identity as much as romance. Holden stands for hope, Audra for resiliency, Kyle for ego, and Claire for growth, each of whom represents a different aspect of human emotion. They weave together to create a beautiful, imperfect, and infinitely complex tapestry of contemporary love. Claire's decision to put herself at a distance is not a sign of weakness, but rather of strength masquerading as vulnerability. Kyle's return to Audra is avoidance posing as a bond, not passion. Holden's love serves as a reminder that even well-meaning intentions can suffocate if they're not based in self-awareness, not as a means of salvation. Audra's seclusion is a form of rebirth rather than punishment. The wider consequences. This plotline questions the conventional narrative of love as the ultimate aim inside the soap opera's universe. Rather, it portrays love as a mirror, reflecting our scars as well as our desires. Claire's path to independence provides a contemporary take on relationship self-worth. Kyle's demise highlights how flimsy masculinity can be when it is based on dominance rather than empathy. The double standard that women encounter when they are deemed too ambitious or too emotional is criticized by Audra's defiance. Additionally, Holden's struggle serves as an example of how challenging it may be to enter someone's life while they are still recovering from another. Lessons in love and loss in the final arc. The characters will be changed by the time this emotional storm is over. Claire will no longer be the woman defined by her lovers, because she is now confident and grounded. After so many failures, Cal may finally confront himself. Despite her tough exterior, Audra will find strength in solitude. And maybe smarter Holden will discover that timing is just as crucial as love. Transformation through adversity is the lifeblood of great soap opera narratives. The crucible through which the protagonists are reborn gives their suffering purpose. That paradox, the beauty of brokenness, the power gained in surrender, is brilliantly captured in The Young and the Restless. In conclusion, the cost of passion. Ultimately, Claire chooses her path and Kyle turns back to Audra is a tale about the price of love rather than a romance. It poses difficult queries like, are we destined to repeat our patterns or can we actually change? Can honesty coexist with love? Can closeness and independence coexist? Claire believes that choosing herself is the solution. Losing what he attempted to control is the lesson for Kyle. For Audra, accepting oneself is the first step toward redemption. And as Holden learns that love must be earned and cannot be hurried, comprehension dawns on him. Their entwined paths serve as a reminder that the purest kind of love starts with oneself, not with another, and that development frequently takes the form of heartache.